I still remember the exact moment I realized my life was about to change forever. I was standing in the marble lobby of Sterling and Associates, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee and watching my husband Randall's secretary Tiffany strut past in her designer heels, completely unaware that in less than 3 weeks I would be sitting in the corner office she'd always coveted, signing the papers that would make me her new CEO. At 52, I had settled into what I thought was my permanent role in life, the supportive wife of a successful corporate lawyer. My name is Agnes Morrison, and for the past 27 years, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I had been Mrs. Randall Morrison, a title that had gradually consumed every other aspect of my identity. That Tuesday morning in September started like every other day for the past decade. I woke at 5:30 a.m. to prepare Randall's breakfast exactly the way he preferred it. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast lightly buttered, fresh orange juice, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The kitchen in our sprawling suburban home in Brookfield Heights was my domain, a place where I orchestrated the daily symphony of domestic perfection that kept our household running smoothly. Randall, 49 and still handsome in that distinguished, silver-haired way that attracted admiring glances from younger women, barely looked up from his Wall Street Journal as I placed his breakfast before him. This had become our morning ritual, silent efficiency punctuated only by the rustle of newspaper pages and the occasional grunt of acknowledgement when I refilled his coffee cup. "Don't forget about the Hartwell Industries dinner tonight," he said without raising his eyes. 7:30 at the Metropolitan Club. Wear the navy dress, the one that makes you look professional. The navy dress. Always the navy dress. It was conservative, appropriate, and utterly forgettable. Much like I had become in Randall's eyes. I nodded dutifully, already mentally planning my day around this evening's requirements. Hair appointment at 2, manicure at 4, and enough time to transform myself into the polished accessory that Randall needed for his business functions. "Of course, honey. Should I arrange for a car?" "Tiffany's handling all that," he replied, finally glancing up with that practiced smile he used when he needed something. "She's incredibly efficient. I don't know what I'd do without her." Tiffany Valdez, 28 years old, with the kind of confident beauty that turned heads in boardrooms and made other women instantly aware of their flaws. She had been Randall's secretary for 3 years, and in that time, she had become indispensable to him in ways that made me increasingly uncomfortable. But whenever I expressed concern, Randall would laugh it off with comments about my imagination and remind me how lucky he was to have such a competent assistant. The truth was, I had once been competent too. Before marriage, before children, before I gradually erased myself to make room for Randall's ambitions, I had been Agnes Palmer, MBA graduate from Northwestern, with a promising career in corporate consulting. I had advised Fortune 500 companies on organizational restructuring and strategic planning. I had worn power suits and commanded respect in boardrooms filled with men who looked exactly like my husband. But that woman felt like a character from someone else's story now. Our daughter Courtney was 24 and living in Portland, working as a graphic designer and calling home just often enough to maintain the illusion of a close relationship. Our son Nicholas was 21, finishing his senior year at Duke University, where Randall's alumni connections had smoothed his path. Both children were products of the best schools, the right connections, and careful cultivation. More trophies of Randall's success than independent human beings who might challenge the carefully constructed narrative of our perfect family. As I cleared away Randall's breakfast dishes, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman staring back at me looked tired, despite the expensive skincare routine and regular salon appointments. My auburn hair, once my pride, had been tamed into a conservative bob that required weekly maintenance to keep its color vibrant. My figure, maintained through disciplined exercise and careful eating, was still good, but it was the body of a woman trying to hold back time, rather than one confident in her own skin. I had everything I was supposed to want: a beautiful home, in an exclusive neighborhood, financial security, social status, and a husband whose success provided entree into the highest circles of society. Yet standing in my designer kitchen, wearing my silk pajamas and diamond wedding ring, I felt hollow, in a way I had learned to ignore through sheer force of will. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days managing a household with the same skills I had once used to manage corporate teams. I coordinated schedules, managed budgets, negotiated with vendors, and solved problems with the efficiency of a seasoned executive. The only difference was that my work was now invisible, unpaid, and completely taken for granted. Randall's law firm, Sterling and Associates, was one of the most prestigious in the city, specializing in corporate mergers and acquisitions. He was a senior partner, commanding fees that most people couldn't fathom, representing clients whose names appeared regularly in the business pages. His success was our success, or so I had been told repeatedly over the years. His achievements were family achievements. His reputation was our reputation. But lately, I had begun to notice things. Little inconsistencies in his stories about late nights at the office, unexplained charges on credit card statements, new cologne, a renewed interest in his appearance that coincided suspiciously with Tiffany's hiring 3 years ago. When I mentioned these observations, Randall had a talent for making me feel foolish, paranoid, or both. "Agnes, you're imagining things again," he would say with that patronizing smile. "Tiffany is a professional. She's engaged to that investment. Banker, what's his name? Omar something. You really should focus on more positive things instead of creating problems where none exist." But I hadn't imagined the way Tiffany looked at me during the few times I had visited Randall's office. It wasn't the respectful deference one might expect from an employee meeting the boss's wife. Instead, there was something else in her gaze, a mixture of amusement and contempt that made me feel like an unwelcome intruder in my own husband's professional life. As I finished my morning routine and prepared to face another day of invisible productivity, I had no idea that the universe was about to hand me an opportunity for transformation that would make my old MBA coursework seem like child's play. The woman who would emerge from the coming weeks would bear little resemblance to the accommodating wife who was carefully hanging up Randall's dry cleaning and planning dinner around his preferences. But that morning, I was still Agnes Morrison, devoted wife and mother, keeper of the perfect home and guardian of the family image. I was still the woman who had learned to make herself smaller so that others could shine brighter. That was about to change in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. The call came at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday, just as I was arranging white orchids in the foyer for that evening's dinner party. 24 hours of careful preparation, menu planning, wine selection, coordinating with the caterers, ensuring every detail reflected the standards expected of a senior partner's wife. The phone's shrill ring cut through my concentration, like a blade. "Mrs. Morrison?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional, but strained. "This is Irene Walsh from Walsh & Associates Private Investigation Services. I need to speak with you about your husband, Randall Morrison." My hands stilled on the orchid stems. "Private investigation?" "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number." "Ma'am, I assure you I don't. I've been hired by Harrison Industries to conduct due diligence on Sterling and Associates regarding some concerning financial irregularities. Your husband's name has come up repeatedly in our investigation, and I believe you need to know what we've discovered." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Harrison Industries was one of Randall's biggest clients, a multinational corporation whose legal fees alone had funded our last 3 European vacations. What kind of irregularities? "Mrs. Morrison, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Are you available to meet today? I'm afraid this is time-sensitive. Our preliminary findings suggest your husband may be facing serious legal and financial consequences very soon." I sank onto the antique chair beside the foyer table, my carefully planned afternoon evaporating. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. How serious? A pause. The kind that typically result in criminal charges and asset forfeiture. Mrs. Morrison, I strongly recommend you consult with an independent attorney as soon as possible. Your financial future may depend on the actions you take in the next few days. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop 20 minutes away, neutral territory where I could hopefully maintain some semblance of composure while my world crumbled. As I drove through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, past the manicured lawns and luxury cars that represented the life I'd thought was secure, my mind raced with fragments of memory that suddenly seemed significant. Randall's increasing secrecy about his cases, the way conversations stopped when I entered his home office, his insistence that I didn't need to worry about finances, that everything was handled, the new clients with foreign names and offshore addresses, late-night phone calls conducted in hushed tones from his study. Irene Walsh was a compact woman in her 50s, with shrewd eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen too much human weakness to be surprised by anything. She slid a manila folder across the small cafe table with the efficiency of a surgeon presenting a diagnosis. "Your husband has been systematically embezzling money from client accounts," she said without preamble. "We have evidence of fraudulent transfers totaling approximately $2.3 million over the past 18 months. The money has been funneled through a series of shell companies and ultimately deposited into personal accounts." The words hit me like physical blows. "That's impossible. Randall would never—" "Mrs. Morrison," Irene interrupted gently but firmly. "I understand this is shocking, but I need you to see something else." She opened the folder to reveal a series of photographs that made my blood freeze. Randall and Tiffany. Not in a professional setting, but in what was clearly a luxury hotel suite. The images were explicit enough to leave no doubt about the nature of their relationship, but it was the timestamp that truly devastated me. Last Tuesday. The same day. He'd told me he was in depositions until midnight. "Your husband's secretary, Tiffany Valdez, is not just his mistress," Irene continued. "She's his co-conspirator. The shell companies are registered in her name. The offshore accounts require her authorization for transfers. This isn't just infidelity, Mrs. Morrison. This is a partnership built on criminal activity." I stared at the photographs, my hands trembling slightly. In them, Tiffany looked radiant, confident, laughing at something Randall was whispering in her ear. She looked like a woman who had everything she wanted. Meanwhile, I had spent that same Tuesday planning a dinner party to celebrate Randall's latest professional triumph, completely unaware that my husband was not only betraying our marriage, but potentially destroying our entire financial future. "There's more," Irene said, her voice softening with what might have been sympathy. "We have reason to believe that Harrison Industries isn't the only victim. Our investigation suggests a pattern of client fund misappropriation going back at least 3 years. Mrs. Morrison, if these allegations are proven, your husband could be facing decades in federal prison." The cafe around us continued its normal rhythm. Conversations, coffee orders, the comfortable, mundane interactions of people whose lives weren't imploding. I envied them their ordinary concerns, their assumption that tomorrow would resemble today. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask. "Why not go directly to the authorities?" Irene leaned forward, her expression suddenly urgent. "Because Harrison Industries doesn't just want justice, Mrs. Morrison. They want their money back, all of it. And they're prepared to pursue every legal avenue to recover their losses, including seizing marital assets." The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. Our house, our investments, our children's trust funds. Everything Randall and I had built together over 27 years could disappear overnight to satisfy the debts created by his criminal activity. However, Irene continued. There might be options if you're willing to cooperate with the investigation. Information you could provide about your husband's activities, access to documents, testimony about suspicious behavior you might have witnessed. Your cooperation could significantly impact how this situation unfolds, both legally and financially. I thought about Tiffany's smug expression during our few encounters, the way she looked at me like I was an obsolete appliance that hadn't yet been discarded. I thought about Randall's patronizing dismissals of my concerns, his insistence that I focus on positive things while he systematically destroyed the foundation of our life together. What exactly are you asking me to do? Help us gather evidence, document his activities, provide access to financial records. Most importantly, continue acting normally while we build our case. We need time to trace all the money and identify all the victims before we move forward with criminal charges. Acting normally, pretending to be the devoted wife while my husband and his secretary planned our mutual destruction. The irony was almost laughable. I had spent decades acting, playing, the role of the perfect corporate wife while my own dreams and ambitions withered in the shadows of Randall's success. But now, for the first time in years, I felt something stirring inside me that I had almost forgotten existed. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that. Not just hurt, though the betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined possible. What I felt was clarity, purpose, the awakening of skills and instincts I had set aside when I chose to make Randall's career the center of our shared life. Mrs. Morrison? Irene was watching me carefully. I know this is overwhelming, but I need to know if you're willing to help us. Time is crucial here. I looked at the photographs one more time, seeing not just evidence of adultery, but proof of my husband's complete contempt for everything we had supposedly built together. Then I met Irene's steady gaze and felt the first stirrings of a plan, beginning to form. Yes, I said quietly. I'll help you, but I have some conditions of my own. That evening's dinner party became my first masterclass in deception. As I smiled graciously at our guests and guided conversations about market trends and political developments, I was simultaneously cataloging every detail of Randall's behavior, every phone call he stepped away to take, every knowing glance he exchanged with the other partners' wives about their successful husbands. Judge Patricia Henley and her husband sat at our mahogany dining table, along with District Attorney Michael Chen and his wife Sarah, completely unaware that their host was potentially facing the kind of charges they prosecuted daily. The irony would have been amusing if it hadn't been so terrifying. Randall's been working such long hours lately, I mentioned casually to Sarah Chen as we cleared dessert plates. These international clients seem to require so much attention, at odd hours. Oh, the sacrifices we make for their success, she replied with practiced sympathy. Michael's been the same way with that new financial crimes task force. He says white-collar crime is becoming increasingly sophisticated. I managed to keep my expression neutral while internally noting every word. The Financial Crimes Task Force. How poetic that my husband might soon become intimately acquainted with their work. After our guests departed, Randall retreated to his study for what he claimed was urgent document review. Instead of my usual routine of cleaning up and preparing for bed, I waited 20 minutes before quietly ascending the stairs. The thin line of light under his study door confirmed he was still occupied. But with what? I had become an expert at moving silently through our house after years of avoiding disruption to Randall's important work. Now that skill served a different purpose as I positioned myself where I could hear his phone conversation without being detected. Definitely by Friday, he was saying, his voice lower than usual. The Harrison transfer needs to be completed before they finalize the audit. Yes, I understand the timeline is tight, but Tiffany has everything prepared. My pulse quickened. Harrison Industries. Irene Walsh had been right about the urgency. Agnes doesn't suspect anything. She's too busy planning charity luncheons and managing the household to pay attention to business matters. We're fine as long as we stick to the schedule. Agnes doesn't suspect anything. The casual dismissal in his voice, the way he reduced my intelligence to charity luncheons and household management, ignited something fierce and cold inside me. For 27 years, I had hidden my business acumen behind the role of supportive wife. Now that strategic thinking would serve a very different purpose. Over the next 3 days, I became a woman I had never been before. Methodical, deceptive, and utterly focused on gathering evidence. I photographed documents when Randall showered. I memorized names and account numbers from conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. I began understanding the full scope of what my husband and his secretary had built together. The pattern was sophisticated, in its simplicity. Randall would identify wealthy clients with complex legal needs, often elderly individuals or foreign corporations with limited oversight capabilities. He would establish legitimate trusts and accounts, then create parallel shell entities that mimicked the real ones closely enough to avoid casual detection. Money would be transferred between accounts in amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic reporting requirements, but frequent enough to accumulate substantial sums over time. Tiffany's role was crucial. Her access to client files, her ability to create convincing documentation, and her talent for impersonating clients during phone confirmations with banks made the scheme possible. She wasn't just Randall's mistress. She was his criminal mastermind. On Friday morning, I met Irene Walsh again, this time armed with photographs of documents, recorded conversations, and a detailed timeline of suspicious activities. But I also came with questions of my own. "I need to understand something," I said as we reviewed the evidence I'd gathered. "How extensive is Harrison Industries' investigation? Are they looking only at Randall, or are they examining the entire firm?" Irene's expression sharpened with what looked like respect. "Why do you ask?" "Because if this scheme has been operating for 3 years, and if it's as sophisticated as it appears, there's no way Randall managed it alone. Sterling and Associates has internal controls, audit procedures, partner oversight. Either the entire firm is compromised, or there are people in positions of authority who have been deliberately looking the other way." "That's a very astute observation, Mrs. Morrison." "I have an MBA from Northwestern and 15 years of corporate consulting experience," I replied dryly. "My husband seems to have forgotten that, but I haven't." Irene smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Harrison Industries might need more than just their money back. They might need new legal representation. Representation from a firm that isn't compromised by criminal activity or questionable ethics." "And you have suggestions for such a firm?" I pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. "I've been researching Harrison Industries' legal needs, their corporate structure, their international operations. I've also been researching their current relationship with Sterling and Associates and identifying potential conflicts of interest that extend beyond Randall's embezzlement." Irene examined my work with growing interest. "This is remarkably thorough, Mrs. Morrison." "Agnes," I corrected, "and this is just the beginning. I want to propose something that goes beyond simple cooperation with your investigation." "I'm listening." "Harrison Industries is going to need a complete legal audit of their relationship with Sterling and Associates. They're going to need new counsel for ongoing matters. They're going to need someone who understands both their business needs and the criminal activity that's been conducted on their behalf without their knowledge. Someone like you?" "Someone exactly like me. I understand their industry. I know their legal challenges, and I have intimate knowledge of how their current counsel has been defrauding them. Most importantly, I'm highly motivated to ensure that justice is served and that they recover every penny that's been stolen." Irene leaned back in her chair, studying me with new interest. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that Harrison Industries consider hiring me as a consultant to manage their legal transition and oversee the recovery of their stolen assets." I'm proposing that I use my knowledge of Sterling and Associates operations and my husband's criminal activities to ensure that Harrison gets everything they're entitled to. And in return? In return, I get the chance to rebuild my career on my own terms, separate from my husband's criminal enterprise. I get the satisfaction of ensuring that Tiffany Valdez's ambitions don't include profiting from stolen money. And I get to demonstrate that Agnes Morrison is far more than just an old lady who plans charity luncheons. The reference to Tiffany's dismissive comment about my age and relevance hung in the air between us. Irene didn't ask how I knew about it. She was too experienced an investigator to miss the personal motivation underlying my professional proposal. "This is highly irregular," she said finally. "So is embezzling $2.3 million from a client while conducting an affair with your secretary," I replied. "I think we're well beyond conventional approaches." Irene closed her folder and extended her hand across the table. "Agnes Morrison, I think Harrison Industries would be very interested in meeting with you." As we shook hands, I felt the last vestiges of my old life falling away. The woman who had spent decades managing household budgets was about to start managing a multi-million-dollar corporate recovery. The wife who had been dismissed as irrelevant was about to become indispensable. And somewhere in a luxury hotel suite, Tiffany Valdez had no idea that her contemptuous dismissal of me as just an old lady was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. The meeting with Harrison Industries board took place in their downtown headquarters, a gleaming 40-story tower that commanded respect from every angle. As I sat in their executive conference room, wearing my best navy suit, the same one Randall always insisted made me look professional, I realized this was the first time in 27 years that my appearance was meant to impress people, other than my husband's colleagues. Harrison Industries was represented by CEO Edmund Harrison III, CFO Maria Santos, and General Counsel David Kim. They had reviewed my preliminary analysis overnight, and their expressions suggested I had their attention in ways that extended beyond mere curiosity. "Mrs. Morrison," Edmund Harrison began, his steel-gray eyes assessing me carefully, "Irene Walsh has briefed us on your unique perspective regarding Sterling and Associates. What we'd like to understand is how your insider knowledge can help us recover our losses and prevent future exposure." I opened the comprehensive folder I'd prepared, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what I was proposing. "Gentlemen, Ms. Santos, what you're dealing with isn't just embezzlement. It's systematic fraud that has compromised your legal representation for at least 3 years. The financial losses are significant, but the potential liability from compromised legal advice could be catastrophic." I spread out charts and timelines I had created, showing the correlation between major Harrison Industries transactions and suspicious money movements in Randall's accounts. Every major contract you've signed, every acquisition you've completed, every regulatory filing you've made during this period needs to be reviewed for potential compromise. Your current legal exposure extends far beyond the money that was stolen. Maria. Santos leaned forward, her expression sharp with understanding. "You're suggesting that our legal strategy has been influenced by Mr. Morrison's personal financial interests." "I'm not suggesting it, Ms. Santos. I'm documenting it." I pulled out copies of emails I had photographed from Randall's home office. These communications show that Sterling and Associates advised against certain merger opportunities that would have been highly profitable for Harrison Industries. Coincidentally, those same opportunities were later pursued by companies that became clients of shell entities controlled by my husband and Ms. Valdez. The silence in the room was absolute. David Kim, the general counsel, looked like he was calculating potential lawsuits in his head. "Mrs. Morrison," Edmund Harrison said slowly, "what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that Harrison Industries hire me as an independent consultant to manage the complete audit and restructuring of your legal affairs. I have intimate knowledge of Sterling and Associates operations, direct access to evidence of criminal activity, and 15 years of corporate consulting experience that my husband has conveniently forgotten exists. And your compensation expectations? Maria Santos asked. A retainer of $50,000, plus a percentage of recovered assets and prevented losses. More importantly, I want Harrison Industries' support in establishing my own consulting firm specializing in corporate recovery and legal ethics compliance. Edmund Harrison exchanged glances with his colleagues. This is highly unusual, Mrs. Morrison. Hiring the wife of the attorney we're investigating presents obvious complications. Mr. Harrison, I'm not just the wife of the attorney you're investigating. I'm his primary victim. No one has a greater stake in ensuring that this fraud is completely exposed and that every stolen dollar is recovered. No one understands his methods and weaknesses better than I do. I paused, allowing the weight of my words to settle. And perhaps most importantly, no one is more motivated to ensure that Tiffany Valdez doesn't profit from this criminal enterprise. David Kim spoke for the first time. You mentioned Ms. Valdez specifically. Are you suggesting personal animosity is influencing your professional recommendations? I met his gaze directly. Mr. Kim, 3 days ago, Tiffany Valdez referred to me as just an old lady who was too stupid to understand what was happening around her. She was wrong on both counts. I'm not old, I'm experienced. I'm not stupid, I'm strategic. And what's happening around me is that my husband and his secretary have stolen millions of dollars from companies like yours while conducting their affair in luxury hotels paid for with embezzled funds. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Edmund Harrison's expression hardened with what I recognized as the cold anger of a powerful man who had been systematically deceived. Mrs. Morrison, he said quietly, I think we need to discuss terms. The negotiation that followed was unlike anything I had experienced in my previous corporate life. These weren't academic exercises in business school case studies. This was real money, real consequences, and real power being redistributed based on my ability to deliver results. By the end of our 2-hour meeting, I had been hired as Harrison Industries' primary consultant for legal affairs recovery, with a mandate that extended far beyond simple asset recovery. I would be investigating every aspect of Sterling & Associates' representation, identifying compromised advice, and developing strategies to prevent similar fraud in the future. More importantly, I had been given access to resources that would allow me to build my own consulting practice from a position of strength rather than desperation. Harrison Industries would serve as my anchor client, providing the credibility and financial foundation I needed to establish myself as an independent force in corporate consulting. As I left their headquarters that afternoon, I felt a transformation that went beyond professional opportunity. For the first time in decades, I was Agnes Palmer Morrison, not just Mrs. Randall Morrison, but a woman whose intelligence and expertise were valued on their own merits. But the most satisfying aspect of the day was yet to come. That evening, I would have to tell Randall about my new career direction without revealing the true scope of what I knew about his criminal activities. The man who had dismissed my business acumen for 27 years was about to discover that his wife had just become his most dangerous opponent. I drove home through familiar neighborhoods, past the comfortable suburban facades that had once represented the limits of my world. Now they seemed small, temporary, part of a life I was already beginning to leave behind. Tonight, I would serve Randall his dinner, listen to his complaints about difficult clients and demanding partners, and smile sympathetically while he described the challenges of his important work. Tomorrow, I would begin systematically destroying the criminal empire he had built with his secretary mistress. The woman Tiffany Valdez had dismissed as just an old lady was about to demonstrate the difference between age and experience, between irrelevance and strategic patience. And the best part was that neither Randall nor Tiffany would see it coming until it was far too late to stop what I had set in motion. The first crack in Randall's facade appeared 3 days later, during what should have been a routine dinner conversation. I had spent the afternoon reviewing Harrison Industries files in my newly established home office, the former guest bedroom that I had quietly converted into my headquarters while Randall assumed I was redecorating. "How was your day, honey?" I asked as we sat down to dinner, my voice carrying the same supportive tone I had perfected over nearly 3 decades of marriage. "Challenging?" Randall replied, loosening his tie with the weary gesture of a man carrying the weight of important responsibilities. "The Harrison Industries matter is becoming more complicated than anticipated. They're asking for detailed documentation of our fee structures and service delivery, highly unusual for a client of their caliber." I continued cutting my salmon, my expression appropriately sympathetic. "That does sound stressful. Are they questioning the quality of your work?" "Not exactly," he said, and I caught the slight hesitation that hadn't been there before. "They seem to be conducting some kind of internal audit, very thorough, very detailed. Tiffany's been working overtime to prepare the requested materials." The mention of Tiffany working overtime sent a familiar spike of anger through me, but I had learned to channel that emotion into strategic advantage. Poor thing. These young people work so hard to establish themselves. I hope you're compensating her appropriately for the extra hours. Randall's fork paused halfway to his mouth. It was a tiny tell, but after 27 years of marriage, I recognized the signs of a man whose lies were becoming more difficult to maintain. "Of course, Tiffany is invaluable to the firm. We take care of our essential personnel." Essential personnel. The phrase revealed more than he realized about how he truly viewed their relationship. Not romantic love, but professional necessity built on criminal collaboration. That evening, while Randall retreated to his study for another urgent conference call, I received a text from Irene Walsh. Stage 2 initiated. Expect increased. Pressure on both targets beginning tomorrow. Stage 2 involved expanding the investigation beyond Harrison Industries. Irene's team had identified 3 additional clients who showed similar patterns of fund manipulation, and federal investigators were now involved. The net was tightening, but Randall and Tiffany didn't know it yet. The first public sign of trouble came Friday morning when Sterling and Associates managing partner, Jonathan Sterling himself, arrived at our house unannounced at 7:30 a.m. I answered, the door in my silk robe, projecting the image of a surprised housewife while internally cataloging every detail of his agitated demeanor. "Agnes, I apologize for the early hour. Is Randall available? We have an urgent firm matter to discuss." I invited him in, noting the way his eyes avoided direct contact and the tension in his usually confident bearing. Jonathan Sterling was a man accustomed to controlling every situation, but today he looked like someone who had lost that control. Randall appeared within minutes, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he took in his senior partner's obvious distress. They retreated to the study, but I had long ago learned the acoustics of our house. Their conversation was clearly audible from the kitchen if one knew where to position oneself while preparing coffee. "We have a problem," Jonathan began without preamble. 3 clients have requested comprehensive audits of their accounts simultaneously: Harrison Industries, Meridian Holdings, and International Trust Services. The FBI has contacted our outside accounting firm requesting voluntary cooperation with a financial investigation. I heard Randall's sharp intake of breath. "The FBI? White-collar crime division. They're specifically interested in client fund management and transfer protocols. Randall, I need to know if there's anything about your handling of these accounts that could create exposure for the firm." The silence stretched long enough for me to prepare a full pot of coffee and arrange pastries on a serving tray. When Randall finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual confident timbre. "Jonathan, you know my commitment to the firm and our clients has been absolute. These audits are probably routine compliance measures. Large corporations face increasing regulatory scrutiny." But Jonathan Sterling hadn't built one of the city's most successful law firms by accepting evasive answers. "Randall, I'm asking you directly. Have you maintained appropriate boundaries and procedures in managing client funds? Another pause. Of course. Tiffany handles most of the administrative details, but everything is properly documented and authorized. I nearly dropped the coffee pot. Even now, facing potential criminal investigation, Randall was positioning Tiffany to take responsibility for their shared criminal enterprise. The man I had loved and supported for 27 years was prepared to sacrifice his young mistress to protect himself. Jonathan's voice carried a warning I had never heard him use with a partner. Randall, if there are problems, they need to be disclosed immediately. The firm cannot protect what it doesn't know about, and we cannot afford to have any partner's personal issues compromise our entire operation. I understand completely. There won't be any problems. But there were problems, and they were multiplying faster than Randall could contain them. After Jonathan left, I watched my husband pace the living room with the restless energy of a trapped animal. His confident facade was cracking, revealing the desperation underneath. That afternoon, I made a decision that would accelerate everything. I called Tiffany's direct line at Sterling & Associates. "Tiffany Valdez," she answered in her professional voice, crisp and efficient. "Hello, Tiffany. This is Agnes Morrison, Randall's wife. I was wondering if you might have time for coffee this afternoon. There are some matters I'd like to discuss with you." The pause was long enough for me to count her heartbeats through the phone. "Mrs. Morrison? Is everything all right? Is Randall okay?" "Randall is fine. But I think it's time you and I had a conversation about the future. Don't you?" Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice carried a wariness that confirmed she understood exactly what kind of conversation I was proposing. "I suppose that might be productive. Where would you like to meet?" "The Meridian Hotel. The lobby bar. 4 o'clock. I chose the location deliberately. The Meridian Hotel was where she and Randall had conducted their affair, where they had celebrated their criminal successes with champagne paid for with stolen money. It was time for Tiffany Valdez to discover that the old lady she had dismissed so contemptuously was about to become the most formidable opponent she had ever faced. And unlike the naive wife she expected to meet, I would be arriving at that. Conversation armed with evidence, federal backing, and a very clear understanding of exactly how much power I now held over her future. The Meridian Hotel's lobby bar was exactly as I had imagined it, understated luxury designed to facilitate discreet conversations. As I arrived at precisely 4 o'clock, I spotted Tiffany immediately. She had chosen a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances, the positioning of someone who valued tactical awareness. Interesting. She stood as I approached, extending her hand with professional courtesy that didn't quite mask the calculation in her dark eyes. At 28, Tiffany Valdez was undeniably beautiful, but it was an aggressive beauty that demanded attention rather than inviting it. Everything about her, from her perfectly styled hair to her designer suit to her confident posture, proclaimed her ambition to anyone observant enough to notice. "Mrs. Morrison, thank you for suggesting we meet. I've been hoping for an opportunity to get to know you better." I accepted her handshake, noting the firmness that bordered on challenging. "Please, call me Agnes, and I think we both know this conversation is long overdue." We settled into leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Tiffany ordered a martini with the ease of someone familiar with the establishment's offerings. I requested coffee, wanting to maintain absolute clarity for what was about to unfold. "So," Tiffany began, her tone striking a balance between friendly and cautious, "what did you want to discuss?" I opened my handbag and placed a manila folder on the small table between us. "I wanted to discuss your future career prospects, Tiffany. Specifically, whether you prefer orange or blue as your primary wardrobe color for the next 5 to 10 years. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the slight pallor that crossed her features. "I'm sorry?" "Prison uniforms, dear. I understand the federal facilities offer limited color choices, but I thought you might have a preference." Tiffany's martini glass froze halfway to her lips. For the first time since I had known of her existence, she looked uncertain. Mrs. Morrison, I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I opened the folder to reveal photocopies of bank statements, wire transfer records, and photographs that documented her criminal collaboration with my husband. I'm stating facts. You and Randall have embezzled approximately $2.3 million from Harrison Industries alone. You've established shell companies in your name to facilitate money laundering. You've participated in systematic fraud against multiple clients over a 3-year period. She set down her drink with careful precision, her attorney's training, overriding her initial shock. These allegations are ridiculous. I'm a secretary, Mrs. Morrison. I don't have access to client funds or authorization to establish companies. Really? I pulled out a document bearing her signature and notarization. Because Meridian Holdings LLC, registered in your name 6 months ago, suggests otherwise. As does the fact that you're listed as an authorized signatory on 3 offshore accounts that have received fraudulent transfers from Sterling and Associates client funds. Tiffany's composure was cracking, but she made one final attempt at deflection. Even if these documents are legitimate, which I'm not conceding, they don't prove criminal intent. Randall handles all complex financial matters. If there were irregularities, I would have been acting under his direction and authority. I smiled, recognizing the strategy immediately. Ah, you're planning to claim diminished responsibility. The naive young woman led astray by her powerful, manipulative boss. It's a compelling narrative, Tiffany. Unfortunately for you, it's not supported by the evidence. I placed another set of documents on the table. These are email communications between you and various financial institutions, where you personally authorized transfers and provided authentication information. These are phone records showing calls you made to offshore banking contacts. Most damaging of all, this is security footage from the Cayman Islands showing you personally visiting the bank where the stolen funds are deposited. The blood drained from her face as she realized the scope of evidence against her. But I wasn't finished. There's something else you should know, Tiffany. Randall is already positioning you to take primary responsibility for the entire scheme. This morning, when questioned by Jonathan Sterling, he specifically mentioned that you handle most of the administrative details of client fund management. He's preparing to throw you under the federal investigation bus to save himself. She stared at me with a mixture of rage and dawning comprehension. That bastard. Indeed. The man you thought was your partner in both crime and romance is ready to sacrifice you the moment his own freedom is threatened. Rather ungallant of him, don't you think? Tiffany leaned back in her chair, her professional mask finally slipping to reveal the calculating ambition underneath. What do you want, Agnes? I want you to understand your situation clearly. The FBI investigation is proceeding with or without your cooperation. Harrison Industries will recover their stolen funds with or without your assistance. And Randall will face criminal charges with or without your testimony against him. I paused to let this sink in. However, your own legal exposure and potential sentences could vary dramatically depending on the choices you make in the next 24 hours. You're offering me a deal? I'm offering you information about a deal that might be available from the actual authorities investigating this case. But first, I need you to answer one question honestly. She nodded warily. 3 days ago, you referred to me as just an old lady. I'm curious. Do you still think I'm irrelevant to your future prospects? Tiffany stared at me for a long moment, finally understanding that the woman she had dismissed so contemptuously had orchestrated the investigation that was about to destroy her life. No, she said quietly. I don't think you're irrelevant at all. Excellent. Then we can proceed to discuss how you might minimize the damage from your monumentally poor judgment in both criminal enterprise and choice of partners. What Tiffany told me during the next hour fundamentally changed my understanding of the situation. As she sat across from me, her earlier arrogance replaced by the desperate calculation of someone whose world was collapsing, she revealed details that made Randall's betrayal even more devastating than I had imagined. You think this started 3 years ago when I was hired, she said. her voice bitter with the aftermath of shattered illusions. But you're wrong, Agnes. This started 5 years ago with your predecessor. I felt the blood drain from my face. My predecessor? Natalie Crawford. She was Randall's secretary before me. Young, ambitious, completely infatuated with her powerful boss. Sound familiar? Tiffany's laugh held no humor. The embezzlement scheme was her idea originally. She had gambling debts and convinced Randall that they could borrow small amounts from client accounts, replace them before anyone noticed, and pocket the difference from currency fluctuations. The revelation hit me like a physical blow 5 years ago. While I was supporting him through what he claimed was the most challenging period of his career, attending firm functions and celebrating his professional successes, he was already building a criminal enterprise with another woman. What happened to Natalie? Tiffany's expression darkened. That's the question, isn't it? She disappeared 18 months ago, just vanished one day, leaving her apartment, her car, everything behind. Randall told me she had gotten cold feet about the operation and fled to avoid prosecution. But you don't believe that. I didn't think much about it at first. I was so focused on proving myself, on showing Randall that I was smarter and more capable than Natalie had ever been. But lately, she trailed off, staring into her martini glass. Lately. What, Tiffany? Lately, I've been wondering if Natalie really left voluntarily. Her disappearance was very convenient for Randall. It eliminated a potential witness who knew all the details of the original scheme. It cleared the way for him to recruit someone new, someone who didn't know about Natalie's fate. The implications of what she was suggesting made my hands shake. Are you saying Randall might have harmed Natalie? I'm saying that a woman who was desperately in love with her married boss, who had staked her entire future on their criminal partnership, doesn't just walk away from everything she's worked for, especially not when that partnership was about to pay off in a major way. Tiffany pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. It was Natalie Crawford, young, blonde, beautiful in a softer way than Tiffany's aggressive glamour. But what struck me most was the expression in her eyes, the same adoring devotion I had once seen in my own mirror when I looked at my husband. There's something else, Tiffany continued. 6 months ago, I found some of Natalie's personal belongings in Randall's private office safe. Her jewelry, her driver's license, some photographs. Why would someone fleeing the country leave behind her identification and valuable jewelry? I stared at the photograph, seeing not just another victim of my husband's manipulation, but potentially something far more sinister. Have you told anyone else about this? Who would I tell? Until this week, I thought Randall and I were partners. I believed he loved me the way he claimed to love Natalie before she betrayed him by wanting out of the scheme. The pattern was becoming clear with horrifying precision. Randall found young, ambitious women who were attracted to his power and status. He seduced them into criminal partnerships that compromised them completely. When they became liabilities, either through fear, guilt, or demands for more than he was willing to give, they disappeared. Tiffany, you need to understand something. You're not safe. If Randall was willing to eliminate Natalie to protect himself, what do you think he'll do when this federal investigation closes in on him? Her face went white. He wouldn't. I mean, he loves me. We were planning a future together after he divorced you. Were you? Or were you planning that while he was planning something else entirely? I leaned forward, my voice urgent. Think about it, Tiffany. How often lately has he talked about your future together? How often has he seemed more interested in your silence than your partnership? I could see the realization dawning in her eyes as she remembered recent conversations, subtle threats disguised as loving concern, increasing pressure to keep their activities completely secret. Oh my God, she whispered. Last week he asked me to compile all of Natalie's files, everything related to the original scheme. He said it was for security purposes, to make sure there were no loose ends. But he was really making sure he had control of all the evidence that could connect him to her disappearance. Tiffany's hands were trembling now. What do I do? If I cooperate with the FBI, he'll know I betrayed him. If I don't cooperate, I'll go to prison for crimes he convinced me to commit. Either way, I could end up like Natalie. I made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Despite everything this woman had done to destroy my marriage, despite her contemptuous dismissal of me as irrelevant, despite the years of lies and betrayal she had enabled, I couldn't sit by and watch her become another victim of Randall's escalating desperation. "You're going to cooperate with the FBI," I said firmly, "but you're not going to do it alone. We're going to make sure that Randall Morrison faces justice for everything he's done, the embezzlement, the fraud, and whatever happened to Natalie. Crawford, why would you help me? I destroyed your marriage. I helped steal from your husband's clients. I called you a pathetic old lady who was too stupid to understand what was happening around her." I looked at this young woman, brilliant, ambitious, and utterly unprepared for the consequences of her choices, and saw something I recognized. She had been where I was 27 years ago, convinced that attaching herself to Randall Morrison's success was the path to everything she wanted. "Because," I said quietly, "I refuse to let another woman pay the ultimate price for trusting my husband." As we left the Meridian Hotel that evening, Tiffany and I had formed an alliance that neither of us could have imagined possible. Tomorrow we would meet with federal investigators and Harrison Industries executives to plan the takedown of a man who had spent years perfecting the art of making women disappear, literally and figuratively, when they outlived their usefulness, to his ambitions. The woman Randall had dismissed as just an old lady was about to teach him that there's nothing more dangerous than a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain from his destruction. The federal raid on Sterling and Associates began at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I know the exact time because I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and watching the live news coverage on my laptop while Randall showered upstairs, completely unaware that his world was about to explode. 23 FBI agents, accompanied by forensic accountants and computer specialists, descended on the prestigious law firm like a highly organized invasion force. Within minutes, the building was secured, employees were being questioned, and boxes of evidence were being loaded into unmarked vans. My phone buzzed with a text from Irene Walsh. "It's happening. Stay strong." Upstairs, I heard the shower turn off, followed by Randall's usual morning routine: shaving, cologne, the careful selection of a tie that projected exactly the right image of success and authority. In 10 minutes, he would come downstairs expecting his perfectly prepared breakfast and his perfectly supportive wife. Instead, he would find me watching his professional life disintegrate in real time on national television. The sound of his footsteps on the stairs seemed unusually heavy this morning, as if he was carrying an invisible burden that grew heavier with each step. When he entered the kitchen, straightening his cufflinks with practiced precision, I looked up from my laptop with what I hoped appeared to be surprised concern. "Randall, you need to see this. Something's happening at your office." He approached, the laptop with casual curiosity that transformed into stark terror as he absorbed what he was seeing. Federal agents walking through the lobby of Sterling and Associates, evidence boxes being wheeled out on dollies, news reporters describing a major white-collar crime investigation involving allegations of embezzlement and fraud spanning multiple years. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor in a burst of ceramic and dark liquid. He didn't seem to notice. "This has to be a mistake," he whispered, his face gray with shock. "There must be some confusion." I stood to clean up the broken cup, careful to maintain the role of concerned wife. "Have you tried calling the office? Maybe Jonathan can explain what's happening." Randall grabbed his phone with trembling fingers, speed dialing numbers with increasing desperation. Each call went directly to voicemail. The office phones, cell phones, even Jonathan Sterling's personal line, all silent. "They've shut down all communications," he said, more to himself than to me. "This is a coordinated action." The news report shifted to an interview with a federal prosecutor who described the investigation as one of the most sophisticated embezzlement schemes we've encountered, involving multiple victims and millions of dollars in stolen funds. I watched my husband's face carefully, noting the moment when shock transformed into calculation. This was the man I had lived with for 27 years, but I was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the charming, successful attorney who had swept me off my feet in law school, but a predator who had spent decades perfecting the art of manipulation and betrayal. "I need to call my lawyer," he said, reaching for his phone again. "Which lawyer?" I asked innocently. "Your criminal defense attorney or your personal attorney?" He froze, finally understanding the full implication of my question. If he was the target of a federal investigation, he couldn't rely on Sterling and Associates for legal representation. He would need independent counsel, the kind that specialized in defending white-collar criminals. "Agnes," he said carefully, "I think you should stay away from the office for a while. This investigation might involve a lot of media attention, and I don't want you caught up in something you don't understand." Something I don't understand. Even now, facing potential federal charges, he still saw me as too naive to comprehend the complexity of his situation. "Of course, honey," I said, my voice gentle with the concern he expected. "Whatever you think is best. Should I cancel our dinner plans with the Hendersons this weekend?" "Yes. Cancel everything. I need time to figure out what's happening and how to respond appropriately." What was happening was that Tiffany Valdez was, at this very moment, sitting in a federal building downtown, providing detailed testimony about 3 years of criminal activity. What was happening was that forensic accountants were tracing every fraudulent transaction back to its source. What was happening was that Randall Morrison's carefully constructed life was being systematically dismantled by investigators who had been building their case for weeks. But most importantly, what was happening was that the old lady he had dismissed as irrelevant was orchestrating his downfall with the same strategic thinking she had once applied to corporate consulting. Except now, the stakes were personal, the motivation was absolute, and the target was the man who had underestimated her for the last time. The knock at our front door came at 2:15 p.m., just as I was arranging fresh flowers in the foyer, white lilies that seemed appropriate for what felt like a funeral. Through the beveled glass, I could see the unmistakable silhouettes of federal agents, their badges glinting in the afternoon sunlight. Randall had been pacing the living room for hours, alternating between desperate phone calls to attorneys and frantic attempts to access his office computer remotely. When the doorbell rang, he froze mid-stride like a deer caught in headlights. "Don't answer it," he whispered urgently. "We don't have to let them in without a warrant." I looked at my husband, this man who had shared my bed for 27 years, who had fathered my children, who had promised to love and honor me until death, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction as I walked to the door. "Good afternoon," I said to the lead agent, a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and an expression of professional courtesy. "I'm Agnes Morrison. I believe you're here for my husband." "Yes, ma'am. I'm Special Agent Lisa Park, FBI. We have a warrant for the arrest of Randall Morrison on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement." "Is he at home?" I stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room where Randall stood frozen in disbelief. "He's right there. Please, come in." What followed was a surreal tableau that would be burned into my memory forever. Federal agents in my pristine living room, reading Miranda rights while Randall's face cycled through shock, denial, and desperate rage. The click of handcuffs echoing off our cathedral ceilings. The careful, professional way the agents searched our home for additional evidence. "This is insane," Randall kept repeating as they prepared to lead him away. "Agnes, call Peterson immediately. Tell him this is a massive misunderstanding. Tell him, Mr. Morrison, Agent Park interrupted firmly. You'll have the opportunity to contact an attorney from the federal facility. Right now, you need to come with us. As they guided him toward the door, Randall turned back to me with an expression I had never seen before. Not just fear, but genuine confusion about how his perfectly controlled world had collapsed so completely. Agnes, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I don't understand how this happened. Everything was secure. Everything was planned. I met his gaze directly, allowing him to see something in my eyes that I had hidden for 27 years. Not the accommodating wife who had learned to make herself invisible, but the strategic mind that had once commanded respect in corporate boardrooms. Perhaps you should have paid more attention to the people you dismissed as irrelevant, I said quietly. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened, then closed, as he finally understood who had orchestrated his downfall. For the first time in our marriage, Randall Morrison was looking at his wife with something approaching respect and absolute terror. You? He whispered. But how? You don't know anything about... I know everything, Randall. I know about Harrison Industries, about the shell companies, about Natalie Crawford. I know about your affair with Tiffany, your criminal partnership, and your plans to sacrifice her to save yourself. The agents were growing impatient, but I continued, my voice steady and clear. Most importantly, I know that you made one fatal error in judgment. You assumed that being married to you for 27 years had made me stupid, compliant, and powerless. You were wrong on all 3 counts. As they led him to the unmarked car, Randall kept looking back at me with the dawning comprehension that his greatest victim had become his most dangerous enemy. The woman he had called just an old lady had systematically dismantled his criminal empire using skills he had forgotten she possessed. I stood in my doorway, watching the father of my children being driven away in federal custody, and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. Tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding my life on my own terms. But today, I savored the knowledge that Randall Morrison would never again underestimate the power of a woman who had finally decided to stop making herself small. The call came from Edmund Harrison himself, 3 days after Randall's arrest made front-page news in the financial section. I was sitting in my kitchen, reviewing divorce papers and asset protection strategies, when my phone rang with a number I now recognized immediately. Agnes, we need to meet, he said without preamble. Something extraordinary has happened, and I believe you're the only person who can help us navigate it. An hour later, I sat in Harrison Industries' boardroom, facing not just Edmund and his executive team, but 3 other CEOs whose companies had been victimized by Randall's schemes. What they proposed would have seemed impossible just weeks ago, when I was still playing the role of the invisible corporate wife. The investigation has revealed the full scope of the damage, Edmund began, gesturing to a presentation screen, showing financial charts that made my pulse quicken. 8 major corporations, over $7 million in direct losses, and immeasurable damage to business relationships and ongoing legal matters. Maria Santos picked up the narrative. But here's what we've discovered, Agnes. The expertise required to untangle this mess, to rebuild these compromised legal relationships, to prevent similar fraud in the future. It requires someone with intimate knowledge of how these schemes operate. Someone with unquestioned integrity, added David Kim. Someone whose personal stake in ensuring justice makes them absolutely trustworthy. Someone who has already demonstrated exceptional strategic thinking and investigative capabilities, concluded Edmund. I looked around the table at these powerful executives, understanding what they were building toward but hardly daring to believe it. What exactly are you proposing? We're proposing the formation of Morrison Strategic Recovery, a consulting firm specializing in corporate fraud investigation and legal compliance recovery, Edmund said, with you as the founding CEO. The irony was almost overwhelming. Morrison, strategic recovery. My name, my maiden name combined with the surname that had defined me for 27 years, but representing something entirely new. The initial capitalization would be $5 million, funded by the victimized companies, as both an investment and a retainer for services, Maria continued. Your mandate would be comprehensive. Investigate the full scope of legal malpractice caused by Sterling and Associates, manage the recovery of stolen assets, oversee the transition to new legal counsel for all affected companies, and develop protocols to prevent similar fraud in the future. But most importantly, David Kim added with something that looked like a smile, we want you to use your unique expertise to identify and prosecute any additional criminal activity we haven't yet discovered. The reference to Natalie Crawford hung in the air unspoken but understood. The FBI investigation into her disappearance was ongoing, but my access to Randall's history and methods made me uniquely qualified to help uncover the truth about what had happened to her. This is extraordinary, I said carefully. But I need to understand something. Are you offering me this position because you believe I'm qualified, or because my connection to Randall makes me useful? Edmund Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious. Agnes, in the past 3 weeks, you've demonstrated corporate investigative skills that rival the best forensic accountants in the country. You've coordinated a complex federal investigation while maintaining operational security that protected all involved parties. You've turned a criminal conspiracy against itself and recovered millions of dollars in stolen assets. He paused, letting his words sink in. We're not offering you this position because of your connection to Randall Morrison. We're offering it despite that connection, because your professional capabilities are exactly what our companies need to rebuild from this disaster. There's one more thing, Maria Santos added quietly. Tiffany Valdez has agreed to serve as your primary investigative assistant, pending the resolution of her legal situation. Her insider knowledge combined with your strategic oversight could be invaluable. The woman who had called me just an old lady would be working for me. The secretary who had dismissed my intelligence would be reporting to me as her CEO. The mistress who had helped destroy my marriage would be helping me build my own corporate empire. Looked around the table at these successful executives who were offering me something I had never dared to imagine. The chance to build a business that would be entirely my own, funded by companies that valued my expertise, focused on work that would prevent other women from experiencing what I had endured. Gentlemen, Ms. Santos, I said, extending my hand across the polished conference table, I accept your offer. Morrison's strategic recovery will be operational within the week. As we shook hands, I realized that Randall's greatest crime hadn't been the embezzlement or the fraud, or even the probable murder. His greatest crime had been convincing me that I was powerless, irrelevant, dependent on his success for my own identity. The woman walking out of Harrison Industries that day bore little resemblance to the housewife who had discovered her husband's betrayal just 3 weeks earlier. Agnes Morrison, CEO, was about to show the corporate world what happened when you gave an experienced strategist the resources and motivation to rebuild an empire from the ground up. The headquarters of Morrison Strategic Recovery occupied the entire 40th floor of the Meridian Tower, the same building where Tiffany and I had our first confrontation in the lobby bar. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood in my corner office, looking out over the city skyline while reviewing the final asset recovery reports 6 months after Randall's arrest. $7.3 million recovered. 14 victims identified and compensated. 3 additional criminal conspiracies uncovered and prosecuted, and 1 missing person case finally solved. The intercom buzzed with my assistant's voice. Ms. Morrison, your 2 o'clock appointment is here. Send her in, please. Tiffany Valdez entered my office wearing a conservative gray suit that projected competence rather than seduction. Her cooperation with federal investigators had resulted in a plea agreement that included probation, restitution, and community service in lieu of prison time. More importantly, her intimate knowledge of financial crime had made her an invaluable asset in building Morrison Strategic Recovery into the premier corporate fraud investigation firm on the East Coast. "The Pemberton Industries case is closed," she reported, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Full restitution recovered, criminal charges filed against their CFO and accounting firm. They're interested in retaining us for ongoing compliance monitoring." I nodded, making notes in the file. "Excellent work. What about the Crawford investigation?" Tiffany's expression darkened. "The FBI confirmed our suspicions. They found her remains in the foundation of Randall's lake house renovation from 2 years ago. The forensic evidence supports our theory that he killed her when she threatened to expose the original embezzlement scheme. The confirmation of Natalie Crawford's murder brought closure to her family, but it also validated the instincts that had driven me to protect Tiffany despite her role in destroying my marriage. Randall Morrison hadn't just been an embezzler and adulterer. He had been a serial predator who eliminated women when they became inconvenient to his ambitions. "The sentencing hearing is next week," I said. "Are you prepared to testify?" "Yes." "My attorney says the additional murder charges make it likely he'll receive life without parole." Life without parole. The man who had once commanded respect in corporate boardrooms would spend the rest of his existence in a federal penitentiary, known to other inmates as someone who killed women to protect his financial schemes. "There's something else," Tiffany continued. "Sterling and Associates formally dissolved yesterday. Jonathan Sterling is facing disbarment proceedings, and the remaining partners are scattered across 3 different firms, all trying to rebuild their reputations." I felt a grim satisfaction at this news. The prestigious law firm that had enabled Randall's crimes through willful ignorance and inadequate oversight had paid the ultimate professional price. "Tiffany," I said, setting down my pen and looking at her directly, "I want you to know that your work here has been exceptional. You've earned the trust of our clients and my respect as a professional." She shifted uncomfortably. "Agnes, I need to say something. I know I can never undo the damage I caused to your marriage, the pain I inflicted on your family. I know that calling you an irrelevant old lady was inexcusable. You were 28 years old and completely manipulated by a sociopathic predator," I replied. I was 52 and should have recognized the signs of his deception years earlier. "We both made choices we regret." "But you saved my life," she said quietly. "If you hadn't intervened, I would have ended up like Natalie. Randall was already talking about my unreliability and suggesting I might need to disappear for my own safety. I had suspected as much." The timeline of events suggested that Tiffany had been approaching the same expiration date that had sealed Natalie's fate. "What matters now is that we use our experience to prevent other women from falling into similar traps," I said. "Morrison, strategic recovery isn't just about financial fraud investigation. It's about recognizing and stopping predators who use corporate power to manipulate and destroy women." The intercom buzzed again. "Ms. Morrison, your 3 o'clock is here. It's your daughter." I smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd felt all day. "Send her in." Courtney Morrison entered with the confident stride of a young woman who had inherited her mother's intelligence and determination. At 24, she was establishing herself as a graphic designer while completing her MBA in the evenings, a path that would prepare her to eventually join Morrison Strategic Recovery as its creative director and future successor. "Hello, Mom," she said, giving me a warm hug before settling into the chair beside Tiffany. "I finished the rebranding proposal for the Henderson Group. They love the new corporate identity package." As I watched my daughter discuss business strategy with the woman who had once been her father's mistress, I marveled at how completely my world had been transformed. The timid housewife who had discovered her husband's betrayal 6 months ago was gone forever, replaced by a CEO who commanded, respect, controlled resources, and protected other women from the predators who saw them as disposable assets. "Ladies," I said, standing to look out at the city skyline that now seemed full of possibilities rather than limitations. Let's discuss our expansion plans for next quarter. I think it's time Morrison Strategic Recovery opened offices in Chicago and Los Angeles. 1 year later, I stood in the same marble lobby where this journey had begun, but everything had changed. The Harrison Industries building now housed the East Coast headquarters of Morrison Strategic Recovery, and the woman who had once felt invisible in her husband's shadow now commanded attention from corporate executives seeking her expertise. Thursa, invitation in my hand was embossed with gold lettering. Sterling and Associates Memorial Gala, honoring our legacy. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me that the disbanded law firm was attempting to rehabilitate its reputation through charity work, while its former senior partner served a life sentence for murder and embezzlement. "Are you really going to attend?" Tiffany asked, joining me in the lobby after our final client meeting of the day. She had proven herself invaluable as my director of investigations, her insider knowledge helping us prevent fraud at 12 major corporations over the past year. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied with a smile that held no warmth. "It's not often you get to see justice served with champagne and canapés." The gala was held at the Metropolitan Club, the same venue where I had once accompanied Randall as his silent, supportive wife. Tonight, I arrived alone, wearing a stunning black dress that proclaimed confidence rather than accommodation. The difference in how people greeted me was remarkable. No longer was I Randall Morrison's wife, but Agnes Morrison, the CEO who brought down Sterling and Associates. Jonathan Sterling approached me near the bar, his once commanding presence reduced to nervous deference. Disbarment proceedings had stripped him of his license to practice law, though he had avoided criminal charges by cooperating with investigators. "Agnes," he said carefully, "I wanted to thank you for your discretion during the investigation. You could have destroyed more lives than you did. I studied this man who had enabled Randall's crimes through willful blindness and institutional arrogance." "Jonathan, I didn't show discretion. I showed strategic thinking. Destroying everyone associated with Sterling and Associates wouldn't have served my clients' interests or recovered their stolen assets." He nodded, understanding that my mercy had been calculated rather than emotional. "What you've built with Morrison Strategic Recovery is remarkable. The legal community has taken notice." "Good," I replied. "The legal community needs to understand that corporate fraud will be met with sophisticated, relentless investigation. Women like Natalie Crawford deserve better protection than they received from firms like yours." Across the room, I spotted several former colleagues from my corporate consulting days, people who had forgotten I existed when I became Mrs. Randall Morrison. Tonight, they were approaching me with business cards and proposals, suddenly remembering my strategic capabilities now that I controlled a multi-million-dollar consulting firm. The evening's most satisfying moment came when the gala organizers presented their memorial tribute to distinguished members of the legal profession who are no longer with us. Randall's photograph appeared briefly on the screen before being quickly replaced, the organizers having apparently forgotten that he was very much alive, just permanently confined to federal prison. As I drove home that night, through the familiar streets of Brookfield Heights, I reflected on the complete transformation of my life. The house that had once been my entire world now felt like a temporary residence, a place to rest between the real work of building an empire that would protect other women from predators who mistook kindness for weakness. My phone buzzed with a text from Courtney. "Saw the news coverage of tonight's gala. You looked powerful, Mom. Dad would have hated that." I smiled, knowing she was right. The woman Randall had dismissed as just an old lady had become everything he had feared most: independent, successful, and completely beyond his control. Tomorrow, I would continue building Morrison Strategic Recovery into a force that would make corporate predators think twice before victimizing women. Tonight, I would simply savor the knowledge that sometimes justice wears designer heels and carries a briefcase full of evidence that can destroy empires built on lies. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.